take a trip with us back to an era where steam engines drove down the street and I don't know. I don't know anything about history, I guess.
No.
Anyway, I'm talking about 2004, of course, which you probably could have guessed. At a time when Poker Superstars was a thing, it was kind of a series of invite-only tournaments featuring the biggest stars of the game, including Gus Hansen and Johnny Chan, who were big deals at the time.
Oh my God.
And they end up with some big hands embroiled in a pot in this Poker Superstars hand.
Even though it may look like a cooler, we actually think there's lots of decisions that these players make that really could be different and probably optimized. Now we're looking at it through the lens 15 years later, and we acknowledge this. Still, we don't love all the decisions, and we're going to get into it right now. And this is, by the way, this hand is still pretty interesting and great, and we're sure why.
Marcelo Imperial Jr. suggested it on Twitter.
But is that how you pronounce his name? It's probably Marcello. Am I wrong?
I don't know.
Probably Marcello.
Oh, maybe.
I don't know.
I kind of hope it is. But anyway, he suggested on Twitter. He included a YouTube link and a timestamp. That's what you have to do if you want to suggest a hand for the breakdown.
Yes, indeed. Now, before we get to everything, we have to acknowledge our sponsors. That is, of course, Nitrogen Sports Poker. Those are the guys with the Bitcoin-only poker room. They are awesome. And at the end of every month, we have a special Poker Guys only tournament where if you use the link that we have on our Twitter feed, you just got to go to our Twitter feed and check it out. We're, of course, the Poker Guys. As a way to sign up to Nitrogen, boy, oh boy, do you get some cool stuff. At the end of every month, we've got this tournament where there's 1,000 buy-ins guaranteed. We get like 80 players. It's a massive overlay. They also have sports betting. They've got casino games. You get your money in fast. You get your money out super fast, too, like in 90 minutes. Holy smokes, get in there and get you some poker on Nitrogen.
That was some hype man stuff right there.
I love that.
That was some fast-talking good stuff. Get on Nitrogen, get you some poker.
One of Series 2. Meantime, action continues with the blinds at 2 and 4,000, and Johnny Chan has called with a Queen 10 offsuit. TJ Cloutier with a King Queen also calls. Haven't heard much from Gus Hansen today. Pair of nines. I'm sure we'll hear a little bark out of the Great Dane. And Gus Hansen calls as well.
Gus Hansen has a pretty good hand here, 2 nines on the button, but he elects to just call and take a flop rather than raise.
Five-handed play here on the flop. And it is Jack 9-4. Gus Hansen has flopped a set of nines. Johnny has an open-ended straight draw. Howard a pair of fours. And the board checks around.
Okay. Before we eviscerate everybody for all of their decisions, let's remember this was 2004. This was a different time. These were among the best players in the world at the time, we think.
Yeah.
Right? There wasn't like a secret society of players that nobody heard of. These guys were actually considered really good, despite their decisions being, from a 2019 lens, very questionable, starting with Johnny Chan's opening decision of limping under the gun with Queen 10 off. I don't know what that's about. We don't have to get into why that's bad. It's just bad.
Yeah.
Right? And then the overlimps are also questionable. Cloutier could have raised. Gus definitely could have raised with 2 nines. I don't know, man.
I mean, at least those are more defensible because Johnny limped under the gun, and Johnny is very, very tight, or has at least a very tight image.
Yeah.
But none of it is really defensible. All three of these guys should probably be raising if they're playing their hands. Gus is the most defensible, I think, of the limp, although also the strongest hand in a very reasonable button raise. But let's move on. The pre-flop play is not ideal.
It is not ideal. The flop play also, in our opinion, not ideal.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunities to bet here. Now, Cloutier makes sense to check. Lederer and Ivy, whatever, they don't really have anything. Lederer has bottom pair. He's not betting that. He's probably not even calling any bet with that. That's fine. He's a bad person, but that doesn't matter. So Johnny Chan could have bet his open under here. I think that's probably a better course of action because he's in a position where he can't really check fold, but check calling feels weird.
He may not be check calling, though. He might be check raising. We're not sure. And he may also be check seeing what Cloutier and Hansen and then the other two blinds do, and then making a decision whether he wants to call or raise. He's certainly not folding unless there's crazy action in front of him, right? But so he might be like raising Gus and calling Cloutier, sort of like, because he's assuming Gus is going to be really wide, which he normally would be, but right now, as it turns out, Gus has the goods.
He has the goods, and he doesn't bet the goods 5 ways on a pretty wet board. A Jack 9 board is pretty wet to start with, and then add that there's a flush draw out there. This is a problematic check in my mind. I think like maybe it's better if Gus is in the big blind. I think in a limp pot he should probably lead anyway, but that would be defensible to check there, try to get a check raise in or something. But he's on the button. There's nobody behind who's going to bet for you, Gus. What is he hoping to accomplish here?
Let's be clear. Gus Hansen has by far the craziest reputation of any of these guys. He's the spewiest guy. He's the guy who puts in more chips than anyone else. He's going to take a shot more than anyone else, especially when it's checked to him on the button. I can't imagine any good reason at all, really, to check here, except, as you said on our podcast, extreme deception, because no one would ever think you could have a set when you check here. That's not good enough when you're 5 ways. This is an absurd check by Gus and a bad play.
Right. I mean, we need to try to get some money in the pot because we very reasonably have the best hand. There's only one hand that beats us is Gus. That's not why he's checking. He's checking for deception. But there are so many bad cards. Anything 7 through king could have made somebody a straight because there's tons of random 2-card hands, and a lot of them would be gut shots and open-enders and stuff. So any of those cards are bad. Any spade is bad. There's too much to protect against. You want to deny some equity with a set of 9s. You also want to get some value. This is just bad.
You're just going to get called often enough by at least 1 or 2 players when you bet here, especially with your rep as Gus. It's just crazy not to bet.
And the board checks around to the turn card, which is a king of hearts. So Johnny now has a king high straight.
And I know this could sound like second guessing, but man, I hate checking on the flop, Mark Gregorich, when I have a set of 9s. There's 4 other guys in the pot, and there's a million draws out there.
Well, stop second guessing because TJ Cloutier in the meantime has bet 20,000. And Gus Hansen has called now with a set of 9s.
And Michael, I'm shocked that Gus just called here.
There are just so many ways for that set of 9s to get run down. We know, looking at our hole cards, that Johnny Chan has already made the nuts straight, but now there's also a flush draw out there. Gus, he just, I think, wants to change his style. He's like the weather in Boca Raton.
And Johnny Chan has made it 65,000 right now. TJ Cloutier folds. This is a great fold. He has top pair and a straight draw, and he folds for this medium-sized raise that Johnny Chan puts in.
So action back on over to Gus Hansen, who is now called with that set of 9s. So on the river, we have a 6 of diamonds. Johnny Chan out there with the king high straight.
60,000.
The best hand, the winning hand, and he bets 60,000.
I'm all in.
Gus Hansen goes all in, and Johnny Chan with the quick call.
Now, that was probably unavoidable for Gus to lose a lot of chips in this hand because Johnny probably wasn't going to be folding on the flop. The king came on the turn. Still, did Gus have to lose as many chips as he did?
I mean, as played, this is the one way he doesn't have to do it. If he bets the flop, I think he probably has to lose them all.
Yeah.
But because he checked the flop, he actually has a chance not to go bust here, or not to double up Johnny anyway.
Yeah.
And somehow he does anyway, and it does bring up sort of an interesting question, which is oftentimes, not often, but a fair amount of the time when you're playing poker, you're on the river, you have a very strong hand, but your opponent is repping super strong also, like Johnny and Gus are right here. And Johnny's check raised the turn and bet the river. Now, he hasn't gone all in, but he's bet the river. And Gus has to decide, he's never going to fold, right? But is he going to call or go for all of it? And how do you make that decision is really the question.
Well, you have to do what a lot of poker players fail to do when they're on the river thinking about stuff. They're thinking about their hand strength alone, and they're not thinking about how the hand went down, what's transpired, and what is in their opponent's ranges. And that's really a huge difference between an okay poker player and a good poker player. And so what Gus should be doing is thinking about the turn, right? He should be thinking a lot about the turn and what Johnny did. TJ bet. Gus called. It's a 5-way pot at this point, and even so, Johnny Chan, the tightest man in history perhaps, decided to raise to 65K. Immediately, the nuts are in his range. Alarm bell should be going off, and as we can see, he clearly has all 16 combos of the nuts because he has queen 10 off here that he limped under the gun.
Yeah.
This is a big problem. The only thing Gus can hope for is that Johnny has a set of 4s maybe.
That's it.
But Johnny doesn't really have king jack ever. He probably would have bet the flop, right?
I mean, he would probably bet the flop with a set of 4s also, which is problematic, but he doesn't have to. But the problem is if he can have a set of 4s and not bet the flop, and it's Johnny Chan, I got to believe at least once in a while Johnny Chan also has a set of jacks and maybe even a set of kings once in a while.
Yeah, he did limp under the gun.
So if you put together all the combos of value that Johnny has, I think king jack's the least likely of these hands, even though it's the most combos. I guess it's the same amount of combos, less combos than queen 10, but whatever. But the value just far outsees the hands that we're beating as Gus if Johnny isn't bluffing. If Johnny's bluffing, we're not getting any extra money anyway when we shove. I think Gus has to just call, even though he's got a set of 9s. You hope Johnny turns over pocket 4s, and when he does, you're like, okay, well, at least I didn't give him the extra 52.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not going to work out well for Gus to shove here very often because it's Johnny Chan. He check raised the turn, and he's betting the river. Small bet, which we'll get to in a second.
Yeah, good.
But Gus, I mean, you're really just hoping Johnny has like ace king and went nuts or something and like is going to call off? I I don't know, man. I don't think there's any value to be had. I know it's only 52K more, but that's 13 blinds. That matters.
Yeah.
That's an important amount of chips, and I don't think there's any value in this shove.
I mean, I think probably what happened is Gus like really read into Johnny's sizing and thought Johnny wasn't as strong as he was repping on the turn, and Johnny just had a good hand, not a great hand, because he assumes Johnny would go all in with the super strong hands. Turns out that's not true. Johnny was afraid Gus was going to fold.
Yeah.
So he bet small. He was trying to get called, I guess, by a king. But ultimately, I mean, let's go to Johnny's bet size.
All right,
though.
so
what do
getting
you
called
think?
by a king is kind of a weird thing to try to do because as we
Yes.
saw TJ Cloutier easily fold the king. Gus is a little spewier than TJ, but he might just fold the king to Johnny Chan on the turn anyway. So I don't think Johnny needs to worry about getting called by a king. He should just be saying, oh, look at what a great job I did setting up this perfect shove size where I'm shoving for like 65% of the pot. It's going to be easy for him to call with a lot of his strong hands, and I have the nuts. This is a good time to shove.
Yeah.
Instead, he bets tiny. He bets 60, having check raise to 65 on the turn. I don't know. I think that's not the most value you can get there, Johnny.
I'm super not a fan of the way Johnny played this hand entirely. I don't like his turn play either, which we sort of glossed over as a check raise. I like it much better as a bet 5 ways because look what happens. TJ comfortably folds the king. It's hard to put many other players on better than a king. Turns out Gus happens to have a set, but that's so unlikely. It's so rare that he wouldn't bet his set on the flop. Like, it's just hard for anyone to have a strong enough hand to even be able to call your check raises, Johnny, on the turn. When you've got the frickin' nuts, I think it works much better as betting himself, where as we can see the hands, he would definitely do at least as well, if not better. He might get more action from TJ, maybe about the same. But I think overall as played, I don't like Johnny's decisions really on any street, except maybe the flop, because maybe he was check raising the flop.
Not a huge fan of Gus's decisions either.
No.
Overall, I think both players made a lot of mistakes, but somebody had to win in the end, and this time that was Johnny Chan.
So we didn't like a lot of the decisions in this particular hand. Didn't like most of Johnny's decisions, didn't like most of Gus's decisions. TJ played fine, I guess.
Yeah.
The blinds were fine, I guess. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with us? Do you think Johnny should have played most of these streets differently? Do you think Gus is defensible maybe for not betting the flop? Or more importantly, it makes sense, do you think, ultimately for him to go on in the river for reasons we haven't considered, or do you just think we're wrong about our reasons? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
We would love to hear what you have to say. I mean, I would like a defense of that river shove because I find it to be quite bad.
Yeah.
But if you have a reasonable defense, I'm way open to it. I'd like to hear it. I would also like you to check out some other hands that we've done, but especially this one with Johnny Chan against Phil Locke. And this is an indication of why maybe Gus Hansen shouldn't go all in on the river. Look at the way Phil Locke perceives Johnny Chan in this hand. Look how easily Phil Locke makes his decision based on Johnny Chan's perceived tightness. Click right up here to check that out.
Yeah, that's a hand where Phil Locke makes a play that so fast and so comfortably and so easily that I think 99% of players in the world would either make the opposite decision really quickly or at least agonize over it. But because it's Johnny Chan, Phil has an easy decision, or so it seems anyway. Now, if you want to know more about how we got into this hand, or even just how we think about poker in general, you're lucky because we have the podcast that we do twice a week. It's called The Breakdown, presented by the Poker Guys, where we spend 45 minutes talking about just this one hand, all the decisions, all the ways down, all the branches on the decision tree. We go crazy deep. We have a lot of fun. I make fun of him sometimes. It makes it better.
I make fun of him sometimes too, and that makes it even better than when he makes
Probably
fun
not.
of me,
Probably
obviously. Also, this podcast is a podcast on this hand, but we also have podcasts that are hands that we didn't do videos on, so you're missing out on those. Those come out on Mondays. If you want more Poker Guys stuff, check out the podcast.
Absolutely. And if you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.